over the entirety of the land. Judah was just a small little branch of people, that was living in Jerusalem and the surrounding area when the Romans had the place. And it was into that area that Yahshua came and presented his testimony of who he was. And so, we're still looking, to the lot of things. And I have a lot of stuff that I can put on this, but I'm going to move ahead because the next verse is verse 22. A little one shall become 1,000, and a small one a strong nation. I, the Lord, will hasten it in his time. And, when commentators look at it, Albert Barnes talks about this. The people then small in number would be greatly increased by the ascension of the Gentile world. And in the Septuagint it says, I will do it in the proper time. And it's always the proper time. Galatians 4:4 gives us the fullness of time. And when you're studying prophecy, Galatians 4:4, in the fullness of time. And that was when Yahshua came and he was born. And at that time, the Romans had control of practically the entire world. They had one of the strongest armies, or the strongest armies. They had a senate. They had rules. They had laws. And so they had one common language pretty much. And so that's what this fell into. And Paul the Apostle, who was the apostle to the Gentile, happened to be a Roman citizen. He was freeborn. He was, and so it's quite extraordinary that the Apostle Paul, who opposed Yahshua in the beginning, Yahshua appeared to him, and he actually became one of the, the prophet to the Gentile, the apostle to the Gentiles. And because of his Roman status, he was freeborn. He could go anywhere in the kingdom, because he wasn't like all the others. So this is the fullness of time. This is how God plans things. And so now we're looking at Israel. She's facing enemies. She's facing war. And whenever you're looking at the end of days like we're doing now, and many of us think that we are in that precursor to many of the events in Revelation to be totally fulfilled, and elsewhere, because you've got a number of places that we look at, like Ezekiel and Zechariah and Daniel. So there's a lot of places that we find prophecies and the things that, we look for these things to be fulfilled, and we look for God, to take care of Israel. But there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen with Israel, and a lot of things are going to happen to America that Americans aren't going to like. And so those are the two verses, and the reason I wanted to do with those are the close of the last verse. But see, what we're going to do now is go into chapter 61. And the reason we're doing this is because this is really the cataclysmic arena that we're looking at. In Isaiah 61, Colin DeLeach says this: the words of Jehovah himself pass over here into the words of another, whom he has appointed as the mediator of his gracious counsel, and that was Yahshua, Jesus Christ. Therefore, not the prophet himself, but he who had been appointed to be the mediator of a new covenant, the light of the Gentiles, the salvation of Jehovah for the whole world, and who would reach this glorious height to which he had been called through self-abasement even unto death. Now that's a perfect description of Jesus, Yahshua. Okay, so now verse 1 is this. Now, this is the exact verse that Yahshua read to, in the synagogue, to a room of people who sat there, and I assumed that they were stunned. And The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound. Now, if you have never heard this verse, you need to look at it again, and you need to read it and study this section. This is one of the paramount scriptures, and this is what Joshua read in order to, tell you who he was. In Isaiah 11, 2 through 5, it says this, "And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord." Now, he had all the fullness of the Spirit bodily, the Godhead bodily. And when he came here, that's what he came as, the one who had all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. And that's why John said in chapter 1 that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And when he came and was born into this, we call him the Word incarnate. And spirit, knowledge, and the fear of the Lord, and shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. And he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. Now this verse has a couple of things in it. And when he came, he did come, and he set the Pharisees correct. Set them right, and a lot of their own things. They were declaring that they were sons of Abraham. The Lord told them, "You are your son of the father. You are of the father, your father, the devil." And within this, he was always getting after them. He said, "You talk about the law, but you don't even keep the law." And he tried to tell them about mercy and a lot of other things, and they would have nothing of it. And so these are part of the things that he did while he was here when he ministered. But with righteousness shall he judge the poor. And just look at how he dealt with the woman who was caught in adultery, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they brought her to him and expected him. He says, well, Moses in the law says we should, stone her. Well, there's a couple of things wrong right away. Do you not think that these guys already knew that she was a whore, or that she did this? So why did they all of a sudden bring her to the Lord? They were always bringing him to catch him. And so remember, he's judging people and with righteousness. And so he doesn't say anything, and in the end they all leave, because he had told them, "He who is without sin cast the first stone." That's logical. That's righteous. Look what they were doing. And so he got down to brass tacks, and he says, "Neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more." That's what he said, go and sin no more. And remember the Samaritan, the woman at the well, she wasn't, she was a Samaritan. And she started talking, he started questioning about all her husbands, and she says, "Well, I'm not married." He says, "Yeah, that's true. You've had 5 husbands." So he ends up talking to her through that whole thing. And by the time he's done, she believes on him, and she goes into town and brings the whole pile of people out to meet him. Is this not the Messiah? And they all went out there, and he stayed there for 2 days telling them. And so this is what it is. Even today, people are in sin everywhere. And we need to bring up, that, Christ can heal you. Christ can forgive you. He can give you a new slate, so to speak. So this is why this is really good here. It tells you how the Messiah is. And here's another one describing the Messiah. Isaiah 42, 1 through 4. And behold, my servant whom I uphold, my elect, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him, and he shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. The Gentiles have never had judgment. The Gentiles, according to the Jews, they were just a bunch of sinners. Matter of fact, some rabbis and other holy men of the Jews, they won't even shake hands with the Gentile because they're so unclean. But, the Gentiles do have someone now, and have had for a long time, that is going to take, the orneriness, the sinfulness, the godlessness out of the tribes on earth known as Gentiles. And it further says of him, he shall not cry nor lift up nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruise. In other words, he's not obnoxious. He's not trying to cause a lot of attention, just for himself by pride and stuff. He shall, a bruised reed shall he not break, the smoking flax shall he not quench, shall he bring forth judgment unto truth. And when you look at that, he's not going to quench the littlest fire in people. He wants to sustain their life. He wants to help them. And so in that little flame, he wants to use that to enlighten them and bring them into the light where they will know who he is. And he's not going to quench the littlest flame. In other words, whatever faith you have, Paul told a number of people when he was preaching to them, don't lord it over other people with your faith. Oh, I've got all the faith in the world. What do you got? I mean, and when you look in America, that's what we do. I can tell you a few preachers, that's the way they work. Not intending to do it, but they do, This is how to have great faith. Everything in America, it's got to be perfect, and so we advertise it, we do everything. But, that's not always the way to be. Be humble and meek. In 53, 11 through 12, this is the reason he's our Messiah. One of the reasons, the main one. 53 of Isaiah 11 through 12. He shall see the travail of his soul and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore will I divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he has poured out his soul unto death. He was numbered with the transgressors, and he bare the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. This is when he died on the cross, but he just didn't die. He was put, of course, in the tomb for 3 days. He was raised from the dead after that, and he was seen alive by countless people, even 500 at once. And so the atonement is connected to all this, and the atonement is required for you to be forgiven. And Christ provided the atonement because in the Old Testament they had to have a sacrifice, that was blameless. And so God chose his Son to be that sacrifice by dying on the cross and shedding his blood. And that is why John, when he looked at him, called him, said, the Lamb of God which taketh away the sins of the world. Because he shed his blood. The shedding of the blood is what sealed the redemption for all of us through Christ as we believe upon him. So all of this is introduced in this first verse that we enter into this chapter 61.